Hi, welcome to the Methane Pavilion at COP26. I'm Molly Taft, a reporter for Gizmodo, and I'm here with Sharon Wilson from Earthworks. So Sharon is known around these parts as the methane hunter, which is an incredibly badass name. But Sharon, what does that actually mean? How do you explain to people what you do?
I make the invisible oil and gas pollution visible. So when the industry started this whole fracking boom thing many, many years ago, they told us that natural gas was a clean energy, and we didn't know any different because you can't see the pollution coming from it. But I use a technology called optical gas imaging, and it's made by FLIR, and what it does is it makes the invisible pollution visible. So it's pretty magical. This is a technology, and it's actually an instrument that makes the pollution visible, but it has an onboard camera, and so it records what it's showing you in real time. So it visualizes the pollution for us.
Wow. So that looks like a camcorder like your dad would bust out at Christmas.
Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah. But how do you physically go and find methane? Do you go to fracking sites? Are you kind of just driving by? How close do you have to be? What's the practical application of this?
So in the beginning, the reason that I wanted to do this is because people who were living next to oil and gas would call us up and say, I'm getting sick, I smell these odors, it's horrible. And the industry would say, it's not us. Look, you can't see anything coming from our side. It's clean. It's the candles and the Windex that you're using. That's what's making you sick.
They said that?
So, yeah, they said that.
Wow.
I mean, it's not the first time that the oil and gas industry has lied to people, so don't be shocked. But anyway, I wanted to help people who were impacted the way that I was impacted by oil and gas. So I bugged Earthworks for about 2 years nonstop, and they did fundraising, got a camera, I got a certification, and I started initially helping families and communities who were impacted, but now it's so much bigger than that. It's not about one family or a community. It's a global issue. Mm-hmm. And within that global issue, Texas is a really, really bad actor. Mm-hmm. The U.S. is pretty bad, and I have been all over the U.S. and to other countries. So I've looked at oil and gas many, many places, and I can tell you Texas is by far the worst of what I've seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So gotta fix my mic. Sorry, I'm getting a...
Oops.
All right, great. Sorry. So I actually was going to ask you about regional sort of impacts. It sounds like, obviously you're from Texas, which has a huge amount of methane production or oil and gas production, and I assume sort of methane as well, like you just said. Talk to me about how the industry's response varies by region. Do you think that some producers in different areas are more concerned about this? Do you think it depends on the state government, the state, the kind of regulations that a country or a state might put on producers? What's been the industry's response in Texas versus the rest of the world that you've been able to see?
Oil and gas pollutes everywhere.
Right.
They all pollute. It doesn't matter if it's a big company or a small company. Mm-hmm. I have found all of them polluting. Mm. But I do think some companies try to do better. Mm-hmm. And even if they try to do better, there are going to be intentional routine emissions. I have had big operators tell me, do you realize that we're permitted to release those emissions? And I'm like, well, thank you for admitting that, So, there are intentional routine emissions. There are emissions from equipment malfunction. Something is going to break. It's a gas under pressure. It's going to blast out. Mm-hmm. There are emissions from emergencies when they have to, like during the Texas freeze, when a part downstream in the supply chain breaks, everything upstream gets overpressurized and it's just going to blast out because it's a gas under pressure. So there's emergency releases, and then there are maintenance releases. So there are releases that are built into the system, and it's not clear to me how they're going to be able to avoid all of these releases.
Right. It sounds like, even if you can make it as safe as possible, there's still going to be malfunctions that release this gas. Yeah?
Right.
Yeah.
And even if, let's pretend they can sprinkle fairy dust all over the industry and suddenly there are no more methane emissions. When you use it, and when you burn it for energy, it creates CO2. So I don't know what it is about we have to stop producing oil and gas, period.
So I think that this is something that, is often, it's been described as at COP as the low-hanging fruit, right? And there is a perception that I think the industry has encouraged that it is in their financial interest to stop methane, both the regular flaring as well as the leaks, which kind of, it makes sense on the surface of let's tighten up our operations and this is wasted gas. But at the same time, they have been remarkably reticent to let any regulations come into place that would actually punish them for not doing so. Can you talk to me a little bit about if there is a financial incentive for these companies to really tighten up their act, or if it's something that we really do need to regulate them to help them reach that point?
They're not going to do it voluntarily. I know there may be some people who disagree with that, but I will tell you there's a practice that the oil and gas industry requires their workers to walk up the stairs along a catwalk where there is a bank of tank battery. On top of the tank battery are these hatches. They're about this big. They open the hatches, and all of that gas the tanks hold liquids, but it has associated gas. It volatilizes. It comes to the top. When they open that hatch, it just blasts out like a mushroom cloud. They open the hatch on every tank, and all this gas comes out. Now, there is a recommended practice by the American Petroleum Institute where they can retrofit the tanks. They can put spigots down at the bottom so they can collect their samples. They can see the levels in the tanks with a Bluetooth.
Right.
But they will not retrofit these tanks unless it's mandated.
Really?
Really.
Even though it's an API says that this is a good
right.
idea.
And 19 men, at least 19 men have died doing this practice. It's called thieving the tanks.
Wow.
And 19 men have died doing this. But when they open that hatch, if it can kill a grown man on site, what do you think it might do to your toddler playing in the backyard 200 feet away? Because they put these things 200 feet away from homes.
Wow.
Even sometimes closer than that.
Wow.
So it's not only an impact to the workers, it's an impact to the community, to the neighbors, and it is an impact globally because we don't need more methane. And here's the irony. One of the technologies that is supposed to capture a lot of the methane coming from the tanks, it's called vapor recovery units. And so we find vapor recovery units failing a lot of times, but if you have a vapor recovery unit on these tanks and a worker comes several times a day and opens the hatches and lets all the gas out, that's pretty ironic. I mean, what good is a vapor recovery unit in that system, in that case? So these are some of the problems that the oil and gas company is going to have to solve.
Right.
They're going to have to take better care of their workers.
Right.
They have to solve some of these problems that are built into the system. It is designed to release methane.
That's really interesting. And I think like a lot of the folks who may be working on these sites might not even realize that these are things that need to be addressed because the industry normalizes them so much as part of the cost of doing business.
Right.
sort of, as it were.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think some of the people who are making up the rules don't really realize some of these things either.
Yeah.
Because I've spent 20 years sitting on the side of the road watching oil and gas. When it started encroaching around my farm, at first I just thought, wow, there's a tower of lights. That looks really pretty. And then they came closer and closer, so I went and found them. And I would park on the side of the road, and I'd be, what is that? They've dug a big hole, and they're dumping this stuff in the hole. So I got a ladder, put in the back of my truck, parked on the side of the road, put the ladder in the back of the truck, climbed up on the ladder so I could see what they were doing.
Wow.
I even climbed a tree one time so that I could get some. I was in my 50s, and I climbed a tree. So, I've been sitting on the side of the road for 20 years watching the oil and gas, and then for about 8 years with this camera. So I do have a lot of concerns about some of what I see that I don't know. I don't think it's going to be as easy as just these easy, cheap fixes. I don't think it's going to be that easy or cheap.
I want to actually, I'm glad you brought up how long you've been doing this. Because you have been kind of tracking this, the IPCC just started talking about methane in a really serious way, just really sounded the alarm. A lot of people, I think, in this space kind of hadn't really thought as hard about methane for as long as you have. Can you talk to me about the changes you've noticed, both in terms of what the industry is saying, if emissions have risen, and maybe how you're feeling about the whole thing? What's the past 20 years, what has changed?
When I went to the COP in Paris, no one mentioned methane. Mm-hmm. And I kept bringing it up, and no one mentioned, it's not about methane, it's about carbon. Methane is carbon, so nobody mentioned it. So I'm really excited that it's a topic here. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a whole day that's nothing but methane.
Right.
And a lot of countries made these methane pledges, but pledges are not plans. And so, again, and a methane pledge should include a pledge to stop producing oil and gas. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear any of those pledges, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about we have to get off oil and gas, we have to stop the expansion. I don't think that you can reduce methane by producing more methane.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really interesting point. I think that for a lot of folks, the messaging of this is something we can fix easily because the industry is on board and we know how to fix it does kind of paper over that example. And actually that makes me think of, Secretary Kerry just gave a press conference where he talked about how one of the things that gives him hope is that science and tracking technology are much better now, and we're able to more easily pinpoint emissions to a specific location, and the world is watching. So he touted the Washington Post piece that ran a couple of weeks ago on this one big oil field in Russia being this huge methane leak as a great example of how increased attention can hold oil companies responsible. But I thought of you, and I was like, well, Sharon's been watching them for 20 years. What do you think? Do you think that if more people start thinking about where specific emissions come from and where methane comes from, then the industry will change its act? Or do you think that we actually need to regulate, basically?
No, we have to regulate.
Okay.
We have to have regulations. The industry is not going to change their act voluntarily.
Right.
And about the methane leak they saw in Russia.
Oh yeah, do you have thoughts on that?
If you can see it from space, it is not a leak. That is not a leak. So that's a problem that the media has. The industry came up with the term leak, and they want us to use that term. They want us to use the term leak. And so we've been very obedient, and everything is a leak. A leak is something that is unintentional. What I'm telling you is a lot of these emissions are intentional. They're routine. They are permitted. They get a permit to release this. So you know, that's not a leak.
Right.
If it's unintentional. If it is an emergency, I guess it's most of the time it's more like a fire hose. So I don't call that a leak either.
No.
I don't find a lot of leaks when I'm out in the field. And when I do find a leak, I get really excited about it because you have to get close to see a leak because
Really?
it's small. So I mean, it may seem like semantics, but it's not really.
I think that is a really, really good point where a leak does sound like it's accidental, we're fixing it, but when I tell people what venting and flaring is, they're like, I'm sorry, what is that? And it is an interesting point for people to understand that they release these gases intentionally and they are allowed to, and Texas especially doesn't really, frankly, seem to give a shit about it, so.
No, they really don't. They don't.
So we have this big methane agreement at COP. Like, this is, like you said, it's the first. How many COPs have you been to?
This is my second one.
Right.
After the one in Paris, I was kind of scarred. So
Yeah. What has this one been like for you? Because this is, again, like, there is attention on this thing you've been yelling about for 20 years, but, you know, is there kind of an undercurrent of that, of we're not maybe doing enough?
So I am happy that methane is a topic. I think what we need is more monitoring is fine, but when you have a mammogram, you don't say, let's get more mammograms. You take action. Monitoring, we know we have a problem. So monitoring, continuing to monitor without action is like getting a mammogram without action. So
Yeah.
I think what we need is action. And I'm really kind of mad because I see all these people being happy, and I want to go, why are you happy? The house is on fire. You know, we need action. So
Yeah.
it's been yesterday was pretty traumatic for me.
Yeah. I can imagine that, you know, it's the start of the conversation for some people, but it's like the middle to the end of it for you.
Yeah,
you know?
I want it to be the end of the conversation, and it's like we're just getting started.
Yeah. Is there anything better? You mentioned the media, and as a member of the media, I would love to take criticism. Is there anything better you would like to see other than questioning terms the industry came up with, but like when people are reporting on this and for non-reporters when they're talking about it, like what would you like to see people emphasize or de-emphasize? Like what should change based on how we're talking about this right now?
I think that the media has done a poor job of naming the culprit. So they report on the IPCC climate report, and they report on climate change, but they don't say oil and gas is responsible. And they don't say that enough. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it registers in the people's minds that this is caused by the oil and gas industry. And there is a poster on the wall right over there that is pure propaganda from the oil and gas industry. We are at this conference because of an emergency caused by the oil and gas industry, and their propaganda is on the wall over there. It just blows my mind how that happened when I could not bring in my poster that said, ask me about methane from oil and gas.
That's wild.
That's wild.
That's really wild.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Wait till you see this poster.
I'm going to go look at it after this.
We should all
Take
go
a
look
picture
at
of
that poster.
Well, I think we're running like right up at time. I mean, I could talk about this forever. Is there anything that you didn't, you think it's important for folks to know, or like any sort of final thoughts about this?
I do want to mention the capture technology because I've researched a lot of that, and it seems that a lot of that capture technology it depends on reliable electricity. Mm-hmm. We are having all this intense weather, and a lot of the oil and gas is in remote areas. Some of it's in people's backyards. But we don't have reliable electricity anymore.
Yeah.
So when the electricity goes down, like during the Texas freeze, or when they have a windstorm, or just anything.
I mean, the grid is like,
anything out in West Texas.
Yeah.
When the electricity goes down, there is no capture that methane is just blasting out everywhere.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a concern.
That's a big concern. And I imagine that that's a pretty, those systems have to be, are they energy intensive or are they just kind of plugged in like everything else? No.
I don't know. They're electric. So we have a lot of problems to solve. And another one is, what army will we hire to regulate all of this, to enforce? Because oil and gas is everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah. And it's going to be, you know, that's one reason that the industry doesn't want to be regulated, because it's probably going to be pretty expensive. So
right.
that makes a lot of sense. Well, Sharon, thank you so much.